people, as you showed. Those high numbers there had to do with a limited supply of the people and the products that are required to build the schools causes an enormous inflation. And by the way, all the school districts kind of all passed. I mean, we were one of the first, but I mean, everybody kind of did it at the same time or maybe 1 year after. So there's a huge amount of demand and not much supply. Now, however, the other, you mentioned as soft costs, things like, furniture and things like that. Furniture costs are experiencing no hyperinflation. I realize that maybe school desks, if everyone is doing school bonds, maybe they can get away with some significant increases, but it's just not going to be like the property costs. Technology, we've experienced sometimes in the past negative inflation in technology because if if you say we're going to do something at a certain speed, there's so many increases in the capacity and the speed that it's actually cheaper to meet that need. We had examples of costs going down anyway in several areas. So my question is, I don't have to pick on anybody in particular, but architectural fees. While there may be more demand for architects, I'm sure there is when there's a big building boom, it doesn't take any more architects or any more time for an architect to design a school with inflated prices compared to the same school with lower inflated prices. And so while the architects may disagree, I don't understand why we would expect most of those items we see in this breakdown soon of all these costs. It seems to me that we're going to see some items that would have justifiable increases, which are still going to come down because of the price of oil and the economy. But I don't see where, if we look at the actual cost of fees, are the architects getting the same percentage of the more expensive budget, or is their fee fixed by what the original budget was?
Their fees are negotiated, and they're lower fees that we're paying than what we paid in the 07 bond.
Right, but this bond is going to have lower fees than the 07 bond, but I'm just wondering of that percentage, that 5% or 6, whatever it is, 6, what is it for an architect?
It's 5.5% to 6%.
Okay, so it's 5.5
Of the
6%.
total.
Yeah,
Of
but
the construction budget.
Okay, that's,
okay, so if the construction budget of something was 10 million, okay, and so they were originally going to get 500,000 just to give so 5%, and then the construction, and so that's what they agreed to when we put them in, and so they were going to get 500,000 for this job, and then the job does not get any more complicated, but it's just that the concrete and steel gets more expensive, and now the project, just again to be extreme, goes up from 10 million to 20 million. Does their fee go up from 500,000 to $1 million, or does it stay at 500,000? Okay, so in other words, that's a soft cost we don't even allow inflation in. So there's some soft costs we don't allow inflation in. There's other soft costs that just don't have very high inflation because they're just general, like books. You mentioned books for libraries. Well, there's no inflation in book prices. So there's no inflation there. And all the inflation, I'm just hoping it's all related to the actual market. And not that just somebody riding the market. We don't want that.
Okay, so this started last week when I was at a budget for Milby, and we were talking about what was going on. And just a reminder, when we passed the bond, Milby was designated to get $82 million. Then on the adjustment, it dropped down to $68 million. And now we see that our construction costs are $45 million. In the presentation for Milby, in which the principal was there, the SSO was there, chief of schools was there, chief of high schools was there. In the presentation, long story short, after the explanation of why we were there to discuss a reduced program scope or construction scope, the principal was asked, out of these plans, out of these designs, what can you live without? On the plan, there was no auditorium. And I asked, what happened to the auditorium? They said, well, we thought we could live with a auditorium within the cafeteria, a temporary stage, portable seating or movable seating, like we see over here in our board conference room, because the auditorium isn't used all the time. as we kept going, the swimming pool was no longer on the plans. And they had it deferred. I said, well, I can live with it deferred if we're gonna get a swimming pool. But no one could answer how far deferred that would be if it would ever come back into being. Plans for third floors on two of the communities, which are two buildings. Well, we can build the third floor shell, but we can't furnish it because of the reduction. The principal currently on the current plans of 1,800 to 2,000 students, which was a reduction from 2,000 to 2,200 students, says, well, if we open under the current construction, on opening day, I'm gonna have 25 floating students, floating teachers. And if we reduce the third floors, it's gonna be almost 50 teachers that'll be floating. You know, how can we negate reducing some of this? And so then someone said, well, we can reduce the quality of furniture in some of the soft costs that aren't included in the construction costs. So to everyone that's a homeowner here, you go out and you look at a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom home, brick, 2 baths, bath and a half, 2-car garage, all the amenities, formals, central air and heating. You put your deposit down on it, you're ready to move in, and when you go out to your lot, what do you have? You've got a nice double-wide mobile home. Now, how many people will be happy with that? And that's what we're asking our constituents to take when we reduce our buildings to no auditorium, reduced athletic fields, or no swimming pools, if we're just talking about swimming pool. And at Milby, we're not even having a full track because of the acreage. And in the planning, I was in those meetings too, and I was okay with doing a half track. But this, what we're talking about, with construction, with the inflation, with the economy, and I told that committee there that I would rather stop the fourth phase construction, use those bond monies to build these schools right, to give the constituents, the communities, what we promised them. I mean, HISD has had a big problem with trust in our community on what we've done with the 2002 bonds, with the 2007 bonds. And we finally got their trust back for the 2012. And now we go back and say, well, we're not gonna give you what we promised. Now, we've talked about a lot of savings, we've talked about cuts, we've talked about everything under the sun on what we can do, except how can we do this with more money? Where will we get more money from? Well, that's a good question. But there are ways to do that if we want to discuss it. And so, I know I've been on a rant here, but I've held my tongue now for quite a bit, let everyone else talk. So, what do you have to say to my comments, and then we'll go from there.
So a couple things, I'm gonna let Sue respond to some of them, because I was not at the meeting, but she was at the meeting. The one thing I do wanna say though, is these are the budgets that the board approved, and we have not reduced any of these budgets, because I know I still hear that. And that is not the issue, there's been no reduction in these budgets. The issue is our purchasing power has been eroded, and that's because of what's happening in the marketplace. That's the issue we're dealing with. So I'm gonna let Sue address the other comments that were made.
Well, in response, can I make a quick response?
Sure.
Manuel brings up a good point. We did approve this, but going back and trying to reopen prior discussions, it brings a source of frustration in terms of, like what Manuel was saying, it's a large campus. Initially it had 82 million slotted for it, and then it was reduced to 68. That happened to Austin High School as well. And I know that there was modifications and funds to several of the various projects, and the bond went through several different iterations before the final list that we had before us was voted on and approved by the voters. So, but it does present a particular set of circumstances in which if the amount of the proposed project budget is at a certain amount and there's an expectation from the community, then we must do whatever we can in our power to look at different creative options to solve these problems, you know, in terms of, like Marvin was saying, perhaps, you know, a short delay to try to get the prices to go down, or looking at the economy and the budget and trying, it's, you know, we don't have a crystal ball to figure everything out. But we do have, our wits and wisdom in terms of how are we gonna be able to allocate maintenance and operation dollars that we have to assist us in terms of, you know, I know that our budget includes M&O. And so and we have job contracts and workers that are going out there working on these various schools, and there's scopes of projects and things of the past. It's like, how can we get these things to line up as best as possible to most effectively and efficiently use our dollars? It makes sense, so that way we can try to make sure that every dollar goes into providing a world-class school that we promise the community. And we do know that there are folks out there that are saying, look, you know, there's much cheaper ways to build these schools. You've got a comparison to different places where they have cookie-cutter campuses, and we promise the community very specific campuses that were gonna be catered to the unique needs of their campuses. So we promised a lot, and our students deserve the best, and so it is important for us to make sure that these dollars are used as effectively as possible. And I just, you know, being a board member for the past 4.5 years, looking at some of the figures and the numbers and the issues that come up, I have great concern when I see the way certain funds are used. And I mean, I could provide a very, very targeted example that demonstrated a disconnect between the appropriate scheduled maintenance for campuses and the difference between folks that were working on the bond committee in terms of responsibility for who was supposed to finish a project in comparison to folks that were just standard, supposed to be doing M&O. I don't know if that disconnect still exists, and if that is creating some type of issues in terms of some of these projects as well, or if there's some way that we can make sure that that is not happening. And so when Mike goes back and talks about, you know, when are we gonna have an overview of the, you know, projects that have major issues that have to come to the forefront so we can understand where those dollars are gonna go, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And, you know, I've heard people in the community say, Juliet, the prices, you know, the per square footage for a lot of those schools, it's very high. And so when we hear people come back and say that they're cutting, and they're cutting, and they're cutting, that is something that, you know, causes me considerable heartburn, but also charges me to ask the administration to make sure that the issues that are coming up at Milby can be solved, and that, you know, and I'm worried because we all have projects in phase 4. And, you know, to say the recommendation, it's like, oh, we'll quit phase 4 to pay for phase 1, it took me, it's like, figure out how to effectively and efficiently use these dollars to make sure that we can, like I said, it's a lot of money.
I
didn't. Go ahead. You're gonna address some of that.
Well, I was gonna really speak to the Milby meeting, to clarify a couple of items. From the purpose of the meeting, as we perceived it, was as a work session with the principal. The information had been developed, an option was put forward, and our intention, evidently not very effectively communicated, but our intention is that it would be a work session for the principal to say, look, we've got some changes that potentially need to be made. What are the things that you can see that could be modified? And unfortunately, everything, you know, that was there was not. It was not intended for him to make a decision at that point, or say, yes, go here, or, you know, anything about that. It was just a work session to have a discussion with him about what, you know, what we were seeing and what the scenario looked like. Also, in terms of the furniture, I evidently miscommunicated about that as well, because there is nothing about this bond program that says we're gonna buy cheap furniture. The furniture actually is a bigger proportion and portion of the school function than it has ever been, because 21st century schools are incredibly dependent on the right kind of furniture in order for them to function the way they're supposed to function. So we would not be buying cheaper furniture, we would be buying different furniture, odds are. than we've seen in schools before. And I'm sorry if I didn't do a good job of conveying that.
So one of the other things that I wanted to address, is your plan for, I'll wait until Mr. Rodriguez. Plan for, increased transparency and communication. I as a trustee don't need to hear that, my projects are being asked to cut scope from somebody in the community. I'd like to be in on that information up front before you go to the schools and ask to do that. Because we have to deal with the backlash of it, because we lent our names to the passage of the bond. So that piece needs to be corrected immediately. The other thing is the communication to the community on what happens with that. Because we had one particular facility that was in court, and all construction had stopped, and it had a green light the whole time. That's inappropriate. We need to make sure that we are saying what is happening with those projects accurately, because when I get an email saying, why is your project green lighted and it's stalled in court for 4 months, that's inappropriate. I mean, we need to be transparent about what we're doing, what we're saying, not just with us, but with the community. And we need to, if we're not on schedule, as this indicates, Group 1 was to begin construction mid to late 2014. That didn't happen, so saying we are on schedule isn't appropriate. Saying we are ahead of schedule for 3 and 4, that's the design phase. Where are we with construction? We're not gonna be ahead of schedule. So we need to be very careful about the messages that we're communicating, because when we do have to come back and make corrections like we're going to have to adjust, then that makes the job a lot more difficult to do. Well, I think, does anybody else,
Well,
Mike,
go
because
ahead on this
Emmanuel, you're
point,
gonna
and
move
then
to something else.
No, I wanna move in conjunction with, but in these construction costs, we have costs for chillers, we have costs for windows, we have costs for roofs, we have costs for lighting, we have costs for fixtures, we have costs for motors, we have costs for all of that, that are being paid out of the bond dollars. That's the blue sheet, of everything I've been talking about right now. And we're the ones responsible for those monies. A second ago, I said, look, we haven't talked about how we can increase our revenue in order to pay for some of this stuff. And at the meeting, I asked the committee, and I think I asked Mr. Sands, you know, what is the actual dollar difference that we need to see in order to complete the projects the way we had anticipated them? I understand the budget is still currently the $1.8 billion that was voted in. We haven't taken anything away from that. But that's still not gonna give us what we had promised, according to what we see with economy and inflation and everything else. So what is the dollar difference? Is it 30 million? Is it 50 million? Is it another 125 million? I don't know. And I haven't been answered, because I've asked that question more than once.
And I don't know if the team has an answer, because they're still negotiating the GMPs. The
But
process
you're
that-
negotiating a percentage of what it could be. So, you know, a ballpark
So
figure.
making an assumption.
Right.
Okay, so Derek, if you made an assumption on averages, what would you say a range would be?
If we went with basically all of the square footage of the new spaces, based off of $210 a square foot, basically where the market is right now, we're looking at approximately $150 million.
An additional $150 million.
Correct.
Whether we find it out of a pot of gold or we go out for another bond, that's what we would need to fulfill our promise to our community. I have here, I've passed it to the board, and I've got other copies here, but this is long-range energy plan to reduce consumption, which is out of the Texas Education Code 44.902. Under A, which is the first thing, it says the Board of Trustees of a school district shall establish a long-range energy plan to reduce the district's annual electric consumption by 5% beginning with the 2008 state fiscal year, and consume electricity in subsequent fiscal years in accordance with the district's energy plan. Now, I don't know what our energy plan is exactly. I know we've been looking at ways of trying to save energy, and the district put out just a couple of weeks ago a press release saying that we're on track to save $8 million. But $8 million is still not gonna pay or come up with $150 million in 4 years that we need to fulfill our promise for the bond. So if I could have 2 minutes of a video to play it, this is the
While
way.
he's in there,
Sure.
Leo, bring me a light bulb or a ballast kit and I'll change it myself. That's gonna drive me, I'm gonna have a seizure over that thing.
So,
Sorry.
so this video that
Quit
is,
when you said that.
Oh,
Oh my God, it
It'll
did.
kick right, go back on, it'll go back in.
is
the
going,
balance.
is going to show a proposal that could help us with this bond project and with the district's financial
Not even
and
close.
our fiduciary responsibility to save monies, the taxpayers' monies,
So,
and move into a further,
Is this germane
I don't know, but
to
I'm not
what we're
done
talking
with the
about?
bond yet.
well,
Yeah.
this is to
No.
show how we could have monies for the bond.
But I still have questions on what we're
Okay,
talking about.
well, we don't hold off on it.
The energy use is not bond money.
No, I know
That's
it's not,
operation.
but anything that could be utilized and woven in with the bond for building.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but you
Right.
couldn't, if you save on your electricity, you could not transfer that money to build capital.
I'm not saying, but I'm saying
Okay.
actual hardware, purchase of hardware, your lighting fixtures,
Oh.
your chillers and whatnot. If
Yeah.
that could be brought in at no cost to the district, it would help with our bond situation.
So I have another question. The athletic facility and the middle school restrooms are not on this bond phasing schedule. Where are we with those two things? Specifically, first, this, because I go that way home, so I go over there every day. I don't see anything happening there, like, at Del Mar. What's happening there? And what, I had a walk scheduled according to the original schedule, and now I'm understanding it won't be done by then, so I need to figure out what I'm doing with that entire walk that was scheduled there.
So I'm gonna ask Derek Sanders, General Manager for Construction, to respond to that.
I guess currently that project is running approximately 2 months behind schedule, in all honesty. It was scheduled to be completed in October, and right now it's tracking to be complete by December. We're looking at ways to try to pull that schedule in, but currently that's what it is right now.
So the initial was summer of last year though, I mean, the summer of 15, right? Okay.
Mr. Moore?
What about the restroom?
And the restrooms?
Derek?
Of the middle school restrooms, currently there are some of the restrooms that are under construction right now at some of the campuses, that were just, some that were recently awarded. And then there is, the third and the fourth phase right now are currently in design right now.
Can you send us that, which schools and where they are and
Sure.
what our expectations are? And you said Del Mar is now slated for December of 15, as opposed to
Correct.
October? Mr. Moore?
I want to ask a question about how you all are continuing to try to keep costs down, because I know you are. And it has to do with this spike again, okay? So in times of rapidly rising prices, the buyer, if he has a fixed contract, which we don't have, is the winner, because there is a deal and they've got to build it for that price. And if you're the buyer, you're just the winner, because it actually costs them less and they have less profit, but you do it. And in declining markets, it'd be it can be the opposite. You would actually, as the buyer, want to benefit from pushing it off and renegotiating a few more times as it comes down. We're in a little different position because we budgeted this, and then you go through the different phases you talked about, and so now we're ready to get started on construction, and everybody's telling us these really great big prices, which are based on what they charged last month and actually what they charged 6 months ago and so forth when we were in the middle of the oil boom. Would it help if there was would you need a policy, change or direction from the Board of Education in order to do more negotiating on the way down here, in order to allow us, the customer, I mean, you know, the school district and the kids, to benefit from this drop in price. Because right now, if we're going ahead and saying, golly, we're behind, we got pressure to finish the school on time, I don't like this bid, and I'm sure it's gonna be better in 3 months, but I'll just go ahead and take it. But then they don't start anyway, you know, because they're bidding a whole job, which is gonna take a year or two to build. And so the prices are gonna come down, it's gonna benefit them, because they've got the price locked in. Is there a way of changing it that would help us to benefit from, without any additional unnecessary delay, to benefit from that? Like by renegotiating a couple more times, or somehow splitting it out into phases, or would that not help? Is that clear what I'm asking?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, it's vague because I don't know how you might do it, but I just want to benefit from falling prices
So,
during the build-out period of these schools.
can't we just take these projects to a hard bid?
I think, let me make sure I understand what you're talking about. You know, all our projects at this moment are CMAR, you know, and they have to give us a guaranteed max. What we're doing now is we're doing some of the negotiating. We have kind of veered off a little bit of that. We're asking them to give us that max price. In other words, it's right here, this is where you're gonna be. But we have actually, in some of those instances, says, guarantee us it's gonna be no more than this, but you might not want to buy your sheet rocker till 3 months down the road. But understand, we're not going to buy it at a higher price. And a lot of the contractors have already said, that's probably a pretty good idea, because if I don't have to buy the project all at once, which is really normally what they do, there will be some savings or possibility of some savings. The critical piece of that is getting that contractor to agree to that guaranteed max right up front. But is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, it sort of is,
That's what we're looking at.
Guaranteed max is not helping us right now. Because
No, it's
that's
not
all. I
helping.
mean, sometimes when a booming market, it's great. But in the falling market, they're gonna be safe anyway and give us a bid, and their prices are gonna drop the whole time they build the thing, and we're not gonna benefit from it unless
Yeah.
we've got some mechanism.
But remember, at a guaranteed max, we have negotiating powers during that time. If you don't do guaranteed with the CMAR, then you could do a low bid, well, then you're stuck with that price.
And
That's
that's
the problem.
flexibility we have right now in this market
Yeah,
to
we're
do
flexible.
somewhat of what you're saying versus if we did CSP or hard bid or more the traditional method, we're locked in. We can't go back and try to renegotiate those prices. And the other piece too, a lot of districts who've traditionally been using CSP as their sole source or primary source, they're not even finding contractors or just finding one contractor to bid. We're having some
They
of
will.
that. We're having some of that issue, but not to the extent of the entire contractor, but certain packages where we have some that'll come in with one bid. And when that comes in, then we'll ask ourselves and the contractor, do we need to put that back out for rebid to make sure there's competition in that? Or do we feel we can negotiate to a price that we're comfortable with, that's within budget?
Am I right in thinking that the situations where we have no bids or few bids, which was the case 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, is gonna be fewer? Now that the market's drying up, there will be more people that actually have room to do our jobs and want more bids, so that should happen less.
So this again is the crystal ball discussion.
Yeah.
Well, oil is at 46 or whatever it is now.
Yes, and a lot of
World has
people are
changed,
talking
yeah.
about oil and what the other piece to consider is there's also projects and other bonds that also happen after us that are not where we are, that depending on how long we wait, they could catch up and start releasing all of that in the marketplace as well, which will it offset what happens with oil? Again, it's a whole crystal ball conversation, but what we're hearing right now is, and what you saw in the article and read is, in 4 months, 4 to 5 months, there should be more of this trickling into the system. And so part of the conversation is how do we try to anticipate some of that in the negotiations we're having right now? And that's what Robert was alluding to.
Yeah, okay, well, so to conclude then, my message to you is, at least on my behalf, is that continue to rack your brains about if you have enough flexibility to take advantage of that situation, or if you feel you need it from the board because the policy says you have to bid things this way instead of that way, and you need to talk to us about changing the policy so you can make us more able to take advantage of lower prices, then let us know. I certainly want to hear
And
that.
I appreciate that. And I think the already having the approval for CMA risk from the board gives us that flexibility to sit down with the contractor and negotiate line item by line item until we can get to a place where we're comfortable.
Yeah, and as my colleague and the president, I might add, said, and use more of the reserves too.
Well, and
It's
good,
just speaking for two of us.
and a good point, 'cause I just wanna make sure we're on the same page, cause I've heard a lot of feedback, we've shared with you our process. And so part of what I'm hearing, and I wanna make sure again, we're on the same page, if there's an opportunity, if we think kind of our best thinking, crystal ball, talking to experts, that some of these prices may come down further in the future, we're okay with saying, we're gonna hold off a little bit before we get going, because we think there's gonna be some of that. I wanna be sure we're okay with that, cause I heard that discussion, and I saw several people kind of nodding their heads when that came up, that may be something we're okay with going forward. And that would provide us some flexibility, that I think is what you're alluding to earlier, that would give us some flexibility. Is that okay?
Within reason, I think, and with the discussion in joint, with us, as long as we're informed, don't just say, okay, a year, we're gonna put this a year behind,
No,
and we'll
certainly.
figure it out later.
And I was thinking more of, if we're looking at, and I'm looking at Derek, and we've had some conversations, if we see this kind of hit the market, we think it'll be kind of 2 to 3 months where
Correct.
that'll happen. So that's the time frame we're thinking, if that's okay with everybody. Okay.
Better safe than sorry.
Well, and particularly if there's situations where we're gonna build a big old high school without an auditorium, that's something that's an indicator that it's worth waiting on. You know, or, you know, we're gonna Three Little Pigs it down to straw because we can't afford brick today, you
I
know,
like
but
that
if we wait, you know, 3 months or whatever, and we get something that's gonna last for a long time, not 15 years, you know, when we're getting kinda old and we're sitting there like we were the ones at the table when this bond was passed, but we, you know, got into a situation that is not set in stone. I just think we have to be smart about how we make our decisions. And I know, you know, I have people with projects that are frustrated because they feel like they're not moving as quickly as we had, you know, set out in the beginning, but I think it's really important for people to know this. And I do think that it's really important for people to know that, oh, because we're, you know, over in that part of town on the map, we're the ones getting left out or screwed out of what we were promised, that this is happening across the district and that you guys are being thoughtful and cutting the right cost or using the power we have because we are about to spend so much money to negotiate for the best prices.
And to your point and what was said earlier, we have been these last few months in truly a contractor's market here. And hopefully, with kind of the change, particularly oil, that's happened, we'll see some of that leverage change and become a little more of an owner's market. Will it go all the way to the opposite of where it's been? I don't think so, but we're hoping it just moves a little bit enough where that gap we shared with you, we can address some of those things if that can happen within the next few months in the marketplace.
Well, and we're still gonna spend all that money and all those contractors know it, and so I think, you know, they also, it's important for them to realize that their reputations are part of this as well. If they're part of the project and, you know, they show up at the meetings with, we're using bales of straw rather than bricks, it reflects on HISD, but it also reflects on the people that we really
Agreed.
took
One other thing I'll add along those lines too is, you know, we've been very careful too, not saying things like, we're gonna throw in all the contingency and reserves up front. Because the message that can come out too is, well, then now we've raised the price, and so there's a bigger budget for us to work with. What I'd like to suggest is we do what we talked about earlier, is give staff, Derek and his team, the flexibility to look at these projects, to look at the reserves and what's there, and make those determinations, project by project, based on a risk analysis of here is where we are, and we feel we've covered just about everything we can, so there's no need to have this much sitting out there. We can move this much here in the construction budget and move forward, versus just saying it now and then when they go and negotiate, they find that the other side knows, well, we know your construction budget's higher, so we're not as willing to negotiate knowing that.
One more thing on that, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us sitting here for this conversation, so I think it's really important that the other trustees have an opportunity to have a meeting and get this information, you know,
So,
I wish they were here before, you know,
With-
but it was a last minute thing.
with everything said,
Yes, sir.
we have students that are displaced out of their schools right now, Milby in particular. And so whenever we can defer the pool, we can even defer the auditorium. But we need to make sure that we keep moving along so that we can finish on what we had indicated, get the students in, and if we still have to continue construction on an auditorium or an auditorium, we can do that. But we need to stay on time for those kids that have already been displaced. The boys' school, you know, they need a place to go. So
Yes.
wherever we've got something started, we need to stay on time with those.
Absolutely, and we're very sensitive to making sure those schools are done so we can get the kids back in their new school, so, agreed.
And I hope all of our partners are aware that the board did give you the ability to, replace contractors who are, not necessarily doing the right things. So when we're having those conversations, you are empowered, right, to be
We've
able to-
already brought that up a couple times with a few firms, not necessarily because they're doing the wrong thing, but because we wanna make sure they're sharpening their pencil.
Good.
So I wanna go back to energy, and I wanna go back to fixtures, and I wanna go back to whatever. What would a percentage of our budget go for lighting fixtures and cooling and windows and roofs?
I don't have energy information, I
No.
wasn't anticipating an energy conversation, and quite honestly, the energy budget is within.
Well, I'm not talking
Can
energy
manage
savings
the-
or energy budget, I'm talking about cost of equipment that would supply those types of functions.
I'd have to get that information.
That's what I was asking, is where's the list of, because I mean, what's your most expensive stuff? Is your chillers, that's your inefficient equipment, and then the buildings themselves that leak like sieves.
Right.
I mean, you know, when you're trying to air condition some of these
And
things.
just so the board knows.
We don't do a
too,
good job of air conditioning buildings anyway, so.
And just so the board knows too, traditionally, what this district has done is, had a full assessment done of its facility, and then a few years later, done an update to that assessment. And so, we did the full in '07, we did the update in 2012, we're due for the assessment again, and so we do have that currently out on the street, to identify a firm to start that, to be able to do a full assessment of facilities, particularly now that we've wrapped up the '07 bond, we think it's a good time to go ahead and do that and have that information. And you were right with your earlier point about in the '07 bond, because we've talked about this, there were conversations at the time that there was gonna be a database and all this, and it wasn't done for whatever reason.
I was on the bond oversight, I showed you, here's my
Yeah,
notbook
and
where I said.
I was not here at the time, but I
we're doing the
understand, and I
database.
know that conversation, one of the things we've done is, the documents we've put out is make it very clear, that is our expectation, once this full assessment is done, is to have
I
that
thought we did that with the
database.
last one, we had the
That was
database.
an update to the last one, and there wasn't a database done in '07.
I know, but I thought in 2012, we had a database of all the equipment and when it was going to be, because I gave me.
Well, we have a
report.
database, which is what the 2012 report, but we wanna have, I guess maybe I'm not being as clear as I'm trying to be. We wanna have a database that takes it really to that next level, where it's really looking at
How many
predictive
light
as
bulbs
well.
have to be changed?
Not necessarily light bulbs, beyond that,
Right.
chillers,
Yeah.
major equipment in the schools,
I
so
thought
we
that
can
was in the
predict.
last database.
The last database had, what's the need right now? What is the projected?
No, because I remember Chavez, it's like 5 years from now, you're gonna have to replace the chiller. Had a listing of it, at the next 5-6 years, and what major capital.
But what it's not doing is tracking the work that's being done along the way. That's the database we don't have. So as we go and change a chiller, that database is not being updated to reflect that change. That's what we're wanting to have this go around.
What's the life of a chiller?
Approximately, Robert,
15 years.
15, 20 years.
And
How
so.
long Chavez been around? 15 years?
It's 12, I think, right now, 12, 13.
That's if you maintain it correctly.
Right, which we haven't done.
So talking about chillers, in our conversation we had the other day for Milby, we were talking about reducing a large chiller to smaller chillers, or from water cooled to air cooled. Again, reducing the lifespan of equipment. You know, how do we maintain a premier equipment that'll last the life of a building? I mean, Terry has said that we're building schools to last 40, 50, 60 years. I know the children aren't gonna last that long.
So that's a wonderful question, and one of the recommendations I would have for the board is as we open these new schools, to have a schedule, a funding schedule to maintain the equipment and all the things we're putting into these new schools to make sure we get the full life expectancy out of these systems. And I've already asked my team to put that together, and that's something that we plan to share with the board, so the board knows if we plan on keeping up with all this, just like you're suggesting, and making sure it's being done right, and we're not losing years of life in the equipment because it's not being appropriately funded, then we're gonna share that, and then we'll have to discuss, is that what we wanna do and how would we fund it as a district?
Okay, so again, it comes down to funding.
It does.
And if you were given a pot of gold, could you use it?
There's no free lunch.
I'm not offering anything to eat, I'm even talking about equipment.
Yeah, I know. Nothing's free.
Do you have a pot of gold?
Well, that's a possibility. If we're willing to hear and talk about it, yes.
Leprechaun.
If I can show you my video.
Yeah, you got 10 minutes.
Can you start that up, please?
Did they get what they needed, direction, feedback, whatever, from the board? I mean,
Yeah, my understanding is
And-
the process we followed is what we'll continue to follow, but we have also the flexibility from the board to be able to shift schedules if needed, if we see that the market may benefit us from doing that. And also the flexibility in looking at reserves and making sure that there's a risk analysis done and we make the best decisions we can. I'm looking at Derek based on what we know at the time when we make those decisions.
You know, if all the school districts in the area had this discussion and made this, which I think is a very, very logical way to handle it, real quick, that message would be out instantly in the market and the prices would change.
Absolutely.
The other thing is Mike, what I had asked for, will we expect that emailed to us?
I have it right here, I can hand it out while that video starts.
Okay, that would be super.
Yes, sir.
So that we can then tell our constituents exactly what we're doing.
And there's a few sheets, but it printed out Bel Air, and then I will make sure that, Mark, would you email the rest? Make sure we have all the sheets updated and send it to the board.
No. Do you have more breakdown in this?
I'm sorry?
You know, the one thing that would help with this is,
Yes.
first of all, percentages. I mean, we can figure those sort of like percentages. And then the second would be more breakdowns, like soft costs, you know, that's,
Okay.
most people
And this
don't
is the
really
original
know.
budget, not the adjusted.
Right, but,
Yes.
Kind of
Yes.
right.
Well, we can't get all
Just
that.
maybe for this, I mean, I don't know if Lunsford, Mike, excuse me, if you, Mr. Lunsford, think that this is, really clarifies it,
No.
or if it would help
No.
with breakdowns.
Yeah, details, so then when you say,
Architect.
the architect's 5%, okay, what is the project manager? So everybody knows what the numbers are, we try to be transparent. And then technology, what does that mean, technology? Is that the wiring, or is that the computers? Contingency and the program cost, okay, 17, that's a huge number, it's not 5% contingency. 17 million out of 17% out of a $100 million budget, so.
Mark, you got that? Okay, so Mark will.
Okay, so we can go ahead. There's a lot of room there.
Chris manages a large facility, spending a lot of money on electricity and water, as well as fuel for his fleet.
That's what we have.
He knows that new technologies can help him lower costs and improve performance while becoming more sustainable. He's been considering LED lighting, installing smart motors, adding advanced water management, intelligent windows, and retrofitting his fleet to run on electric or natural gas. But where should Chris start when he has no approved budget? While trying to answer these questions, Chris came across Sustainability as a Service, or SaaS, from GSV Sustainability Partners. This service determines the best technologies that have the highest impact for Chris's situation. Best of all, they install them totally free, with no long-term commitments, minimums, or guarantees. Budget solved. So how can they spend hundreds of millions and do it all for free? Simple. The technologies save so much money that GSV is compensated through sharing part of Chris's actual savings. Chris contacted GSV to determine the opportunities that have the biggest impact. GSV immediately identified changing all their lights to LEDs and a new integrated water management master valve and moisture sensor system. Chris's organization agreed to share part of their actual proven savings, and GSV paid for everything. There were other benefits too. If Chris doesn't save anything, he doesn't owe anything. If he changes his mind, he can simply return the products and still owe nothing. Chris avoided the traditional procurement process because he spent no money, and that was huge. The deal was simple, fast, and risk-free. Accounting loved the lower resource costs, elimination of maintenance fees, and all with no CapEx or balance sheet impact. Best of all, Chris was a hero. His organization staff enjoyed a greatly improved facility while saving money. At the same time, everyone was proud of management's visible commitment to be sustainable and green. All Chris could think about was the savings that were lost by not acting sooner. SAS can save you money on your resource costs while improving your infrastructure both quickly and easily. Be a hero. Call or send GSV Sustainability Partners an email today.
So, in a nutshell, this is a possibility on equipment, on lighting, on fixtures. There's no cost to the district. It should bring the district some savings. It can be vetted through legal for the contract. I don't know of anyone else that's out there that's willing to do it for free. And if we want to give it back, like they said, there's no cost to us, we'll give it back. And they'll install whatever it was that we had originally back into place at no cost to the district. So, I see a lot of potential savings on our construction budget cost if possible, if done right, if done on time. Or if we want to go back and see refit in schools that currently exist. And if we don't want to jump into the water head first, we can do a test program at no cost and no risk to the district to see how much potential savings we could have. Does anyone know how much we spend a year on electricity?
Robert? I'm not sure.
We got an RFP out for it.
I don't have it. We had it all bundled up with water. It was all bundled
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $30–40 million a year.
It is.
So, you know, if we saved half of that, I know we can't put that money back into construction, but we can put it back into teacher salaries, we can put it back into PUA, we can put it back into programs across the district. So it's not just looking at the construction program, it's also looking at the district at large, at all the programs that we can use it for, and what would be available to us if we had additional monies that aren't given from the state of Texas.
Don't we have an energy guru that's supposedly walking us through all this?
We do. We have an energy manager who has a plan that's been developed with a group of industry experts. He has a
Maybe
committee
we
she
should
works
have
with.
them come and talk to us about what they're doing and their vision and whether or not this works or not.
Be glad to.
Since they're our resident experts.
But in anything that we're doing with them, we're still paying for it.
Regardless, you said half, I'd be surprised if you could save half of your electric bill by LED light bulbs. There's gonna have to be some drastic changes to save that much energy.
Sir?
Well, yeah, I agree. Let's hear, this is nothing new. This is an advertisement for one company, and that's, I'm sure they do very well. There are plenty of companies that do this. This is not an unusual concept. And so let's have an actual discussion on this where the administration's prepared to discuss it, because it's kind of like insurance. You can self-insure, or you can go out and pay for insurance, or you can do something where you do partial self-insurance and partially outsourced insurance. So we might cover ourselves up to a certain point and only use insurance for the extra. So you can do this, we can and do this in some cases already. I know individual households as well as this district is probably already switching out certain things to LED lights. That's a real easy thing. You can finance that internally. If you don't have access to finance markets, then you've gotta go something like this. It reminds me in a lot of other industries, people use factors. So if they don't have enough cash, they go out to a special company that will buy the receivables of their own customers at a 5% discount, and they make a fortune. And if you don't have the ability to go out there and finance your own receivables, in other words, you're so strapped for cash that you don't have any time to wait, then you have to factor, and somebody just, cashes it in and makes 5% a month, minus the, of course, the collection. So anyway, this self-insurance, self-energy, self-anything is something that can and has been analyzed. I think it's a great idea. Something can be done internally or externally. It's too bad, when we do it, let's make sure Ken Hewitt is here, because every time we've discussed this at any length in the past, the chief financial officer has been here to discuss it.
I have to adjourn the meeting with no further business to discuss. The special meeting of the Board of Education is now adjourned at 10:56 a.m. But Mr. Moore, you can continue. We just lost the board. Okay.
Yeah, we can update with the detail, yes, Mark Miranda.
So did we take this once before and it ended up that we had to lay out some money? It wasn't
Oh, 204. I still didn't beat my record yet. Still can't get it in 2 hours. Oh, it was nice. Oh, no, it was good. The weather was great. I like this course better than the other two.
Yeah,
It's just the faster course.
Marmion. I'm gonna meet with Derek. I'm gonna have you come in.
Okay.
We can figure out what's happening.
Okay.